Tennessee flops, Ryan Day saves his job for now.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in this, the greatest sport on planet Earth, whatever you make of the first round playoff weekend. This episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Penn State and Lane Kiffin in the second segment. Please don't miss that one. I have many thoughts. And what is North Carolina doing at quarterback for Bill Belichick? I don't know. His offensive coordinator is Wes Welker, if you didn't know. Fun fact. So let's talk about Tennessee. Flop City. I mean, I picked the Vols to upset Ohio State. I did not suspect we would see complete and total chalk in a year in which college football has been so wild and crazy and open. It turns out Vegas had some idea of who the better teams were on Saturday. So the Vols get absolutely blasted, embarrassed, run off the field, both ends. I thought the face mask call early, which was the correct call. Early on, I thought it was going to be a turning point in the game. Turns out it was. It was a turning point for how big the margin of defeat Tennessee was going to have to endure for the entire offseason. Because Ohio State dominated this game start to finish. This was 21-0 before Tennessee was able to get their hands out of their pockets and warm up on an 18-degree night or whatever it was in Columbus. Awesome environment, by the way. I loved the home playoff games. It's the best part of the 12-team playoff by a landslide. But Tennessee just wasn't ready. They weren't ready. Now, I am more than a little surprised the defense played the way it did. They weren't good on third down. They were giving up big passing plays. They did not sack Will Howard. I didn't have that on my bingo card. That's something that if you told me going into the game, hey, they're not going to do this, I would have said, no, you came back from the wrong Ohio State-Tennessee matchup. Tennessee is going to have some sacks. They're going to create havoc. Nope, Will Howard had all day to throw, and he played phenomenally well. Tennessee, offensively, wasn't ready. I think that carried over to the defense. Something you see with football teams pretty often, particularly at the college level, but it happens in the NFL too, is the defense gives up an early score. All right, it happens. Offense on script. When the offense then comes out and just gives a dud, just does nothing and doesn't show any signs of life or promise, that's got to be demoralizing for a defense, man. And the Vols defense just never responded. There was no counter. Now, Vols defensive staff, they got outcoached by Chip Kelly, Ryan Day and company, who I was told aren't any good. It turns out they still know what they're doing. So the good news for Tennessee is twofold. Number one, this is the worst Nico is ever going to be as a passer. Because when I watch Tennessee's offense, what is so staggering to me is that Nico is a one read and tuck it sort of guy. And it's as if there aren't even options available or open other than one read that he has on a particular play. I never see him just check the ball down for 5 or 6 yards here and there. I never see him take an easy underneath completion. It feels like every passing play, Josh Heupel is trying to get Nico, or Nico is trying. I don't know exactly which way there's the push and pull is leaning towards. It feels like they're always trying to hit a home run, and then when it isn't there, it's just Nico, go ahead, take off and run. So the passing attack with Nico at quarterback has to be better next season for Tennessee. That much is plainly obvious to Vols fans out there. I don't think I'm breaking any news, but that was certainly a huge disappointment for Lane Kiffin more than anybody else in particular. So I'll save thoughts on that for later in the show. Let's talk about Ryan Day. Ryan Day comes out and has the biggest margin of victory of anybody. Remember when SMU was getting blasted by Penn State? I thought Penn State would win and cover. They won. They covered. That was the game that I had pegged as this is the most likely blowout. It was a blowout. Penn State was just better on both sides of the ball. Looked like they had more talent, looked like they were better coached, they were more ready to play, they were prepared for the weather. I mean, across the board, Penn State was a heck of a lot better. I've got more thoughts on them a little bit later in the show as well. But that wasn't the biggest margin of defeat in the first round of the playoff. And some people were surprised that games went this way. Why? We've been seeing this in the 14 playoff for years. You thought when you included more teams that aren't capable of making themselves one of the 4 best in college football in the eyes of the committee, you thought suddenly playoff games were going to all be competitive all the time when you have a seeding system that makes absolutely positively no sense to anybody, anywhere? You thought it was going to be that way? Okay, well, yeah, that's your prerogative. You think whatever you like. But Ryan Day, for the moment, saves his job, I think, for the season. If he goes and we had blowouts this weekend, I'm going out on a limb. Oregon, Ohio State, no blowout looming there. If that game had been played at Autzen Stadium, Ohio State probably wins. It was, so they lost. But if you play a coin flip game against an undefeated team and lose after a dominant, not just a win, but a dominant win against a top 10 team, you're not firing that guy. I know the Michigan loss stings. I get it. I've spoken to Buckeye fans who have told me, no, he's got to go. He's got to go if he doesn't win the national championship. I'm here to tell you, they're not going to pull the trigger on that. Not after you win a home playoff game in that fashion, because suddenly there was a narrative about Ryan Day building. Can't beat Michigan, can't win a big game, can't do this. All he can do is beat Penn State. Well, here's Tennessee out of the mighty SEC, and it wasn't close. You can't just look at that as a win. You have to look at that as a thorough out coaching from one sideline to the other. Because yes, most people would probably say Ohio State's got a better roster than Tennessee. It shouldn't have been that big. It should not have. The gap between those rosters, whether you looked at 24/7 or any metric or asked anybody's opinion, nobody would say that game should play out that way. So I thought Tennessee was capable of pulling the upset. I was wrong. Because the one side of the ball the Vols have been able to rely on all year got absolutely cooked. Where was the defense? Where was the pass rush? It didn't show up. The offense not having a great day. I didn't expect them to go bonkers and score 30 points in that weather. I thought they'd make it to the low 20s. They hit 17. So that's kind of what I expected from Tennessee offensively. Not entirely. They were disappointing at some level. And yeah, they got dinged up throughout the course of the game, and that played a factor. But I think part of the reason they got dinged up, Ohio State was just hitting people. That was the Ohio State defense everybody's been waiting to see and has seen periodically throughout the year, but hasn't seen all the time. But that was more importantly the offense. That's where Ryan Day comes from. Remember, he was an offensive coordinator, offensive guy, quarterback guru. Well, boy, he had Will Howard looking like an NFL draft pick, whereas 2 weeks ago, you would have said Will Howard is an undrafted free agent in the NFL. Looked a heck of a lot better in that game. How many times did Ryan Day and Chip Kelly have a wide receiver running wide open in that game? So they did a great job, and I think regardless of what happens against Oregon, they are going to be back in 2025 because that performance, that was a statement for Ryan Day, for the entire Buckeye staff. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on Twitter at smclaughlincfb or at lockdown_CFB. DMs and mentions wide open. Can Penn State win it all? That and the college football playoff, leaving out the SEC. I don't know which one I have more thoughts on, but I have thoughts on both. That's next. First, a reminder, this episode brought to you by Rocket Money. So, do you know what Rocket Money can do? Help you find subscriptions that you are paying for twice or that you're not using. And guess what? Then, all of a sudden, you're not paying for them. And boom, you're saving money. Rocket Money makes it easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings together everything in one place. I don't think that's great for realignment. I think it's great for finances. Whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year, Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. So, cancel your unwanted subscriptions and have a personal finance assistant with Rocket Money and reach your financial goals faster as well. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. I am changing my opinion from earlier this season on Penn State. I continued picking them to get upset throughout the course of this year. At Wisconsin, they almost did. They didn't. At USC, I thought they would. They found a way to win anyway. So Penn State, I've picked all their other games correctly. I thought they'd lose to Ohio State. They did. I thought they would lose to Oregon. They did. I thought they would win and cover against SMU. They did. And I didn't pick them to lose any other games this season, but I did have those two in there. What I am seeing with Penn State is a team that is catapulting itself into that upper echelon of college football. And I think it began with the Big Ten championship game. Ohio State losing to Michigan opens the door for Penn State to waltz into Indianapolis, and yeah, they lost. They lost. They moved the ball up and down the field on one of the best defenses in college football. And even though they weren't victorious in the game, they seem to have a confidence, a spark, a swagger about them that I didn't always see this year. And Drew Aller, without Bo Pribula there as a safety blanket backup, he looks like the best version of himself. And this Penn State offense is tricky, clever, creative, uses a lot of motion. They can be explosive. They can chew the clock. They don't have great threats on the perimeter, but you know what? They do a lot of other things well. And when you look at the way that team plays defense, led by Abdul Carter, and look, they've got guys in the secondary like A.J. Harris who play really good football as well. I think this Penn State team can emerge as the national champion this year. Yeah, I said it. I've come around. I've seen too many data points. What about the Ohio State game? Do you think Ohio State can win it all? Because I just watched Ohio State take Tennessee to the park and dog walk them out of their own stadium there. That was not close. They owned them, dominated them. And guess what? Ohio State lost to a 7-5 Michigan team that should have been 6-6 if Ohio State had done what they should have in the final week of the regular season. So if you go back to one game and you say, well, what about this? When you get new information, I hope you update your opinion, because I look at Penn State and I look at this field generically and say, okay, well, not generically. I look at this field across the board and say, okay, Texas has still not beaten a team that is currently ranked outside of Clemson. They played well, but were they overwhelming? Not necessarily. I thought Clemson had a good game, and Texas is just better. Okay. Did any of you think Clemson was a national championship contender? No. So Texas, for all the resume talk we hear about Indiana and such, haven't been a top 10 team this year. Okay, so let's just throw that in there as a particular data point. Oregon's number one team. They're undefeated. Do you feel like if Penn State played them 10 times in that Big Ten championship game, Oregon's winning all 10? I don't. I thought Oregon was better. I didn't think Oregon was light years better. And how close were they against Ohio State? Oh, that's right. One possession game. Well, they'll have to go through Georgia with a backup quarterback. Sorry, that's not as scary of a football team. They still have a pretty high floor. Ceiling isn't the same. So Penn State can win with either side of the ball. And when they bring both, you get the SMU performance. So color me impressed. I think Penn State's playing good football, and James Franklin's got that big game narrative about him. You know who once had a narrative hanging over his head about winning the big one? Kirby Smart. Yeah, it's true. Can Kirby win the big one? Can Kirby beat Nick Saban? Can Kirby break through? Boom! 2 national championships in a row. If we'd had a 12-team playoff last year, maybe 3. Who knows? But everyone has a breakthrough at some point. Jim Harbaugh, by the way, go back to the COVID year. Michigan wanted to run him out of town. It was all terrible. Takes some guys longer than others. So I think Penn State's playing really good football. You know who wasn't playing good football when they needed to? Ole Miss, Alabama, South Carolina. These are teams that I have been reliably informed by the SEC homers out there, of which some people have accused me of being, because I've actually labeled myself that. I have been a proponent of SEC bias for a long time because it has been warranted for a long time. But like my opinion on Penn State, my opinion changes when I get new information. And I watched the SEC all season long. I watched them lose a variety of non-conference games they didn't used to, and I watched the product they had on the field in league play. And I said, it's probably still the best conference in college football, but they don't get the same benefit of the doubt that they used to. So Lane Kiffin has turned into whiner extraordinaire on Twitter. He went pretty dark, incredibly quiet, by the way, during the Tennessee game. Because do you know who had the largest margin of defeat of any team on the first weekend of college football? The SEC. Tough look. If that happens to the ACC or the Big 12, I know for a fact the SEC fanboys would come jumping out of the woods and they would be tweeting up a storm. This is why you should have had this. You should have done this. A couple of things. First of all, Lane Kiffin, beat Florida or Kentucky. The second of which is not a bowl team. The second of which doesn't have another Power 4 win. And you had them at home. So let's start there. Because I would have advocated for 10-2 Alabama or 10-2 Ole Miss into the playoff over 11-2 SMU. I'll give you a half game of leeway between you and someone else. I will not give you a full game, or certainly not two, when you put the product on the field that you did all season long. Tennessee went out there and got run off the field more than anybody else. Clemson was more competitive with Texas, by the way. Think about this. The SEC that everyone's clamoring for, that they should have gotten this team in, they should have done this. And look, Greg Sankey's just going to expand this thing to 24 teams at some point, and so it won't matter, because then we'll be debating, whether or not the third best Mountain West team should be getting in, or the seventh best Big 12 team, or what have you, seventh best SEC team. You get the point that I'm trying to make there. The way that the SEC played this weekend, they were the least dominant conference out there. SMU stinks. They didn't win the ACC. They were terrible, 38-10. Okay, so you're saying the ACC is a really weak conference. That's weird. The most competitive football game on Saturday was the ACC going to the SEC runner-up. This on the heels, lest we forget, of the SEC champion being pushed to 8 overtimes at home by a 7-5 Georgia Tech team that's playing in a bowl game I'm not familiar with. They're going up against Vanderbilt, if you're curious. So, all the SEC folks that were just homers about, you should have put this team in, and this never would have happened if you... Alabama lost 24-3 to Oklahoma. Don't tell me they're not capable of getting blown out. They got blown out by a team that isn't even any good. They weren't even any... Do you want to hear something? Indiana was getting crucified because Notre Dame took them to the woodshed on Friday night in South Bend. Indiana played Ohio State closer in Columbus significantly than the SEC did. You can blame that on Tennessee. Do whatever you like. But the SEC superiority crowd, you don't have much of an argument here. You just don't. You had it until Tennessee went in and got absolutely blasted into oblivion. The playoff committee did the right thing. We didn't get the 12 best teams. It's a combination of best and deserving there, friend. And guess what? I'd still like for the regular season results to matter. And you know what? I'm not so certain they didn't put in the 12 best teams. It turns out blowouts can happen in football. It works that way sometimes. Ask Tennessee. All fired up about that. Lane Kiffin went from incredibly likable and funny to the least likable coach in all of college football. Just the excessive complaining and jabbing and whining. It's just absurd. Completely absurd. Let's end the show with some off-season chatter. What's Bill Belichick doing at quarterback? I don't know. I don't think he does either. That's coming up next. First reminder, this episode brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs, they're almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Do you want to bet the college football playoff? Did you bet all the favorites? Well, you would have been pretty sharp for doing so. They all won. They all covered. I thought they would go 2-2. So turns out my picks went 2-2. Think of that, whatever you like. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. You can bet on players. You can bet on teams. You can bet on games. Everything you want, they've got it. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more, not less. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Has Bill Belichick found his answer at quarterback? I don't know. So I've had my doubts about Bill Belichick. Have my doubts since he won't coach a college football game for a very long time. I don't know that he's going to have a quarterback he's really in love with or that is really good. So if you think to the end of the Patriots run when Brady left, it was not all Brady. It was not all Belichick. And based on what happened after he left, you probably are able to reasonably conclude it was more Brady than Belichick, but they both needed each other. Brady had great defenses. This pains me to bring up because I'm a Seahawks fan, but it's too applicable for the moment to ignore. If Brady doesn't have a great defense and this guy named Malcolm Butler, he has one less Super Bowl ring. That game was won, but Brady gets the ring, and that's all anyone remembers. They both needed each other. Bill Belichick is going to... They took Ryan Brown in the portal from Purdue. Athletic guy, showed no consistent competency throwing the football at this point in his career. Belichick's got Wes Welker coming in as his offensive coordinator. I don't know. Maybe... maybe it works. Maybe he comes in and he's coaching him up and it goes well, but I just wonder. I just wonder if you don't have a quarterback, when has Bill Belichick ever been dominant? Now that was in the NFL. That was in the NFL. That was then. This is now. You've got Ryan Brown in the room. You've got Jacoby Criswell. You've got Max Johnson could come back. Any one of these guys could transfer in this portal window or in the spring portal window after the quarterback competition plays out. That feels likely, but I just have so many concerns, so many questions about how this is going to work out for Bill Belichick and company. Because when it was this revolving door of Brian Hoyer and Cam Newton and whoever else they threw in, Mac Jones, it didn't work. It didn't work when you didn't have high-level quarterback play. And Belichick has never had a propensity, especially towards the tail end of his career, for identifying or developing offensive talent, or putting good coaches in place on the offensive side of the ball. Ryan Brown, not the answer. Reports came out that they were looking at John Mateer and made a big push. The Washington State transfer who went to Oklahoma with his former offensive coordinator, Ben Arbuckle. That would have been a move that turns heads. And North Carolina has done some nice things in the transfer portal with a couple of guys that make you go, oh, hey, that's kind of a nice pickup over there. But if you don't have the quarterback right, how far can you really go? North Carolina has had the quarterback right before this season, and they weren't able to get that far. And I know Belichick is the best coach in the history of the NFL. I'm not disputing that. Never have, never will. It's pretty easy to see, though, at the end, it wasn't very good. Michael Jordan with the Wizards wasn't the same guy. LeBron's still the same guy in the NBA because, he's just nuts. But eventually, the game's going to pass him by. And I haven't seen Bill Belichick's masterclass of coaching and brilliant in-game schematics and incredible game planning actually translate to a lot of winning on the football field in a long time. So if you're going with these guys at quarterback, I don't know that you are in the right place. You've got a young athletic project in Ryan Brown who could be really good one day, but will need development. And then you're going to have Criswell and Johnson battle it out. And look, North Carolina's offense wasn't terrible this year per se, but that was with a different offensive coordinator, not Wes Welker coming in. So once again, I got my hand raised going, I don't know. Speaking of quarterbacks and questions, let's go up to Madison, Wisconsin, where Luke Fickell hasn't been terrible, just hasn't been great for Wisconsin so far. They've almost pulled some upsets. They almost beat Oregon. They almost beat Penn State. But man, it's just kind of been okay. I don't think it's been a disaster. I don't think Fickell's got major hot seat consideration going into year 3. He might going into year 4 with what he's rolling out at quarterback here. So they added Billy Edwards Jr. from Maryland, who's a fine player. 65% completion this year, 15 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Maryland threw for a lot of yards. And when you watch Edwards, you go, yeah, okay, he's got some solid talent. He should be better than Braden Locke, who was the backup that took over after Tyler Van Dyke got injured. Locke was a 55% completion guy, threw 13 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. He's a power 4 backup or, frankly, a G5 FCS starter. That's just what he is. So that's not the way forward for Wisconsin. Never was. Tyler Van Dyke, he's not there anymore. He played 3 games, got hurt, 63%, 1 touchdown, no picks in those 3 games. And what I wonder about with Wisconsin is you got these options at quarterback now, and Billy Edwards, he could be solid. But Luke Fickell's best season as a head coach came with Desmond Ridder, who was a 3rd-round draft pick in the NFL. His offensive system requires high-level quarterback play. And there were quotes and discussions going around online about Fickell's going to get it more back to the old school Wisconsin and whatnot and more under center stuff. And I think he's just giving fodder to the fans. You can't be what you're not. And Luke Fickell is a spread it out, throw the football kind of guy. But what I've struggled to see, made a change at offensive coordinator at the end of the year, and understandably so, I never have gotten the sense in the 2 years he's been there that Wisconsin's had any sort of identity. This is a program that when it is run correctly, it's like Michigan State. In their best year, they can play with the big kids in the conference. And in their worst year, they can be a bottom dweller in the conference. There are a lot of ebbs and flows, but they tend to hover in the middle. Wisconsin has continued hovering right in the middle this year. And I just don't love what I have seen offensively because they've got some solid players, but not enough to overwhelm you. And they've got respectable quarterback play, but not great. Billy Edwards Jr. is closer to respectable, not great, than he is a guy that revolutionizes what you're now capable of offensively. If Luke Fickell is going to make this work in 2025 with Edwards at quarterback, he's got to do a phenomenal coaching job, and the offensive staff has to do better in allowing the quarterback to succeed, because I just haven't seen a system that allows for one to have a lot of success or that has a clear identity about what they want to do, what they like to be. It feels like there's a mismatch there. So, quarterback carousel continues afoot. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.